Okay, it's starting now. It's 6:04. We have a lot to cover tonight, so let's get started. Just things. Thank you for joining us. We have a Spanish translation today. Irene Alba is our translator. So for English only speakers, when you hear one of our participants speak in Spanish, you can click on a little globe in the lower right-hand corner. And to hear a participant speaking in, if you're a Spanish only speaker, you can click on the globe for a translation to Spanish. We just want to mention that this panel discussion is being recorded, so people who can't attend can watch it at a later date. We will be using the chat function. I have an error in here. So if we need to clarify information in your question, we may unmute you or ask you to unmute. Keep your questions general. We'll be sharing plans on how you might get individual help at the end of the call. Use I statements or we statements if referring only to your family. Be open-minded, no judgment, be concise, get to your point. Good rule of thumb is after sharing, wait until 3 people share before you share something new. Keep this call confidential and leave out identifying information on your kids. Assume best intentions, be kind, and own the impact of your words. The best practices on Zoom are to stay on mute unless you're speaking. And we're going to ask you to put your questions in the chat, so I don't think there will be much speaking on the part of the participants unless we need to clarify something. Limit background noise. We mentioned the chat already. Share your face. We'd love to see you and make sure everyone has a chance to share. We have on our panel today, myself, Mary Hughes. I'm the Special Education Parent Liaison with Raise Your Hand. You're familiar with our organization, grassroots, parent-driven, pro-public education entity that is about empowering parents and disseminating information here. So I want to introduce Jackie Ross from Loyola University School of Law, Civitas Child Law Center to have her tell us about her org.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you, and thank you for coming. Yeah, I am an attorney, an adjunct professor out of Loyola's School of Law. We have an education advocacy project, which is, we have law students who represent families in suspension and expulsion proceedings. We have an anti-bullying project, which is headed up by a director who's an attorney. And then I do a lot of special education representation. I should probably add that I used to be a teacher at a therapeutic day school. So I feel like that's a little relevant. Yeah, Melanie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie Grant, and I'm an attorney at Equip for Equality. And I run our Latinos with Disabilities Advocacy Project. So hola a todos. If you need Spanish-speaking help, you'll probably get me, but now you see Alexandra Kusky on the line. She's also with Equip for Equality, and we're the resident Spanish speakers. But we, at Equip for Equality, we are a nonprofit organization that is federally mandated, and so every state has an organization like ours to protect the rights of people with disabilities, and we work in our special education clinic. We have a free helpline where every parent who calls our helpline can get some advice, and then we also take cases for representation in special education contexts. We have a couple of projects for transition age students right now and for the corrective action based on the denials from 2016 to 2018 from CPS. So those are some special projects that we have going on right now, but overall, if you have a special education question, you can talk with an attorney and get some information and advice.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to mention that I put a link to the agenda at the very top of the chat, but I will do another one here just to make it easier. Okay, so like I said, we have a lot to cover. We want to talk about remote learning plans and what are they? If you
Yeah,
have
so
any questions, put them in the chat and I will read through them.
yeah,
Go
so
ahead, sorry, Melanie.
6 months ago, no one knew what a remote learning plan is, and here we are. So a remote learning plan is supposed to be something that is kind of setting the expectations for what is going to happen when your student is learning remotely, learning from home, using virtual or pen and paper, combination of ways to access their education. And so this can include whatever we think a student needs, but I think the most important parts of it are setting those expectations. And I think a basic part of a remote learning plan would include a basic schedule. I think the way CPS has set up their remote learning plans with in connection with the IEP, it's not that detailed. So I would definitely want to have both like a daily schedule for my student, and then based on the remote learning plan, what goals, what objectives are going to be worked on, what time frame, who's going to be supporting my student during those times, what accommodations, what modifications are going to be provided. So all of that information can be part of a remote learning plan. There's no real like official guidance on this. So if the remote learning plan that you have isn't sufficient for you to understand what your student is supposed to be doing, then that's where we want you to start communicating that to your IEP team.
Okay, thank you. Does a parent have a right to have input on the plan?
Yes. So, the remote learning plans for students with disabilities, this is a way that it's all related to the student's right to have a FAPE. And so parents, they're an important part of the IEP team. And so of course they should have a voice in these remote learning plans. You guys are now the teachers, the related service providers, unfortunately, so your voice very, very much should be heard and considered in kind of changing what that plan looks like. So I just want to, I think that a lot of parents were sharing their frustrations with schools in the spring. And, it was a really, really hard time for everyone, teachers, administrators, parents included. And I think that parents started to maybe feel like, well, everyone's having a hard time. Maybe like this issue isn't as important, or it's not an IEP concern. So we just want to show you really quickly things that we consider to kind of be special education, remote learning concerns that are totally on the table in terms of things you can talk about with the school. So if your child's work is too hard, if you have concerns about your child's related services, we're going to talk about very specific concerns that we saw with that. If you're not able to sit next to your child because you have a job, because you have other children, because you have other things going on, but that's the only way that your child is doing work, you should absolutely share that with the team so they can reduce the what is expected of your child, or support you in other ways, support your child in other ways. And we'll talk more specifically about some ideas around that. If you're having tech issues, if your child's not able to access, Google Meets or whatever, you need to talk about that with the school. If your child is really showing a lot of school refusal, if they're refusing to show up to Google Meets, you should share this. If your child's being bullied through Google Chat or anything like that, we want to know about, you definitely want to tell the team about that. Scheduling concerns, and if your child is losing skills. So all of these things are complete fair game, and we recommend that you you know, bring this to the attention to the team. I think at first, you know, people might have said like, you know, everyone's struggling right now, but like now these considerations really need to be thought of and considered, and people need to come back to the table and really think about how this can be more workable for you, for your family. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm going to take a few questions. Oh, go ahead, Melanie.
I was just gonna say, and if you want to request an IEP meeting, that is the mode to like get your input into the plan as well. To officially have like a document that has your concerns in it is one thing that you can do. So at any time you can request an IEP meeting, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. But just to know, that's, you know, writing a letter, like an email specifically with your concerns, and then requesting an IEP meeting to have it incorporated into the plan.
Thank you. So we've got a few questions about remote learning plans, parents not having them, asking if they need to be in writing, and when will CPS send them to parents if they don't have them? I think we're covering that a little later on, but go ahead.
So the need to develop remote learning plans, like separate documents that are called remote learning plans, that was really a message that yes, teachers like that came from above. Other districts in Illinois are not doing that. Instead, what they might do is have an IEP meeting and have like a section in the IEP that says remote learning plan. So if you didn't get a remote learning plan in the spring, we're actually going to talk about how that actually could have been a good thing for you, and I'll just explain that in a minute. But I would encourage you to reach out to the school team. I think it's better to let a week or two go by to see like what's working, what doesn't work, and not just be speaking theoretically, because you know the school's probably going to say, okay, yes, it was a huge struggle in the spring, but we're going to do better this fall. So I would give the team a little bit of time to be able to like sort things out, but then you know, request that remote learning plan. You can request an IEP meeting, like Melanie said, and request, you know, a copy of their schedule, including when your child's going to have their related service providers. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's no like legal requirement to have a remote learning plan, right? This is, you know, a new thing that we're coming up with kind of as the situation unfolds. But if you feel like whatever's happening in your school for your student is not working, then you should be actively requesting one. If you feel like you have a sense of what the expectations are, and you feel like you have a sense of what your family is going to be doing, then, you know, maybe you don't need to have a meeting to discuss a specific plan. But if you feel like it's not working, that is when, you know, having something in writing and expressing those concerns is a good way to communicate effectively. Generally, what CPS is doing right now is when you have your annual IEP meeting, then they will have a section now. They've added it to their their system that is like a separate remote learning plan. And so if you have an annual IEP coming up this fall before November 8th, you'll likely get one at that time. If you can't wait, then definitely request an IEP meeting to get it.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions here says they got a plan at the end of the spring session that they had issues with. Do we request an IEP meeting? Well, I believe we'll get to that, but maybe that will segue us into discussing what went badly in the spring.
Yes.
Yeah, so in the spring there were there was a lot of confusion. The expectations were you know, reduced expectations for learning happening, and so there's been a lot of changes over the summer with new guidance and a lot of changes from ISB and from CPS on how to really do remote learning. So a lot of times we saw remote learning plans, excuse me, that said, oh, we're going to work on one IEP goal or two IEP goals out of their 4 or 5 or 6 IEP goals, or we saw a lot of, you know, the minutes were reduced, you know, for across the board, they would change the minutes or they would change services in the IEP to reflect what the remote learning was supposed to be looking like, because there was a modified schedule, a shorter schedule. So there was just a lot of, sorry, I lost the screen for a second, a lot of different changes that were being made. And, you know, it would say, you know, I saw IEPs that were like, you know, we'll work on math, you know, and that was like their remote learning plan. We'll work on math virtually. We'll work on reading virtually. And so yeah, really picking and choosing what they were going to work on was a problem. Reducing the minutes was a problem. Just not really knowing when students were working on what, not, you know, having, you know, regular frequency of like face-to-face, you know, virtual face-to-face lessons. All of these things were kind of haphazard, and it really depended on the school and the teacher and a lot of different things. So hopefully we can, you know, move past all of that craziness, and, you know, a new school year will bring a new energy and a new organization to trying to help students connect and be ready for learning.
Right.
Yeah, I would just, yeah, I just want to, you know, draw attention to, if you did get one of the quote unquote like earlier remote learning plans, you might have seen one that says, will this goal be addressed during the remote learning period? CPS clarified to schools that teams were not supposed to be doing this. They really were supposed to be doing all of the IEP goals. So this should not be the case anymore. If you have one of the like old remote learning plans, I would request a new IEP meeting to discuss your concerns. Let me just, you should have one now that looks like this, where it just says, there's no column of will this be worked on. It just has the goal, it has who is going to be responsible, and how it's going to be worked on. So that is how CPS is doing their remote learning plans now. The reason that, oh, I should show one more thing that we saw a lot of. So it was a short.
Can I mention one thing?
Yeah, please.
No, I just wanted to mention another difference from the spring remote learning plans is that some had minutes in them and they're not supposed to. Is that,
Yeah.
You're going to share, Jackie?
No, I was gonna share, that's absolutely right, Mary. I was gonna share that we also saw like a huge use of, like, maybe a student traditionally had 30 minutes of outside social work, meaning the social worker came in, pulled the student out of the regular classroom and gave them social work services in a one-to-one setting or in a small group setting. What we saw during remote is that providers were pushing into the general education class. Now that it is a short, now that it's a full school day, your child should really go back to whatever, you know, method he was receiving services before. So less of like the social worker pushing into the general education class and like popping into the remote session, and more of whatever was happening before. Now, it might be that like your child really benefited before, like, so a social, they don't have to say on the IEP the size of the group. If your kid is pulled out, maybe your child is seen in a group, maybe they're seen on one-on-one. You might want to be flexible right now. If maybe in the past your kid has really benefited from one-on-one, I could see a student really benefiting at this time from being in a group, to have that social interaction.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question from the chat.
Yes.
What do you do when your school doesn't adhere to minutes regularly? And what can we do?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm loving these questions. Deborah, I don't know if you've called Sufio. You should try calling Sufio if you haven't had luck other places. And we are trying to work on like systemic solutions like that can help everyone and hold CPS accountable, hold ISB accountable. We know it is a really, really, really tough time right now. Yes. Okay. Going back to the related to if your child doesn't normally get what's in the IEP normally, I would request the related service logs in writing and do like a, do a comparison. How often is your child really missing your related services? Illinois takes a qualitative approach. So if your child has missed 200 minutes of social work, it doesn't mean that you would get 200 minutes of social work back. It's more of like a qualitative, what would this child, how would he be functioning had he been getting the appropriate amount of minutes? It's a little bit more annoying than just a quantitative calculation.
Yeah, and I would say if your school normally, doesn't have a special education teacher that, provides the full minutes, or you're regularly not getting the related service minutes, the related service log is what Jackie said, is where you can figure out if they're getting the minutes. For the special ed teacher, there's not a similar log. So I would be trying to communicate with the case manager and saying what is really happening, like what are the minutes, and I would be documenting that in an email to the case manager on a regular basis, saying like, I understand that we don't have a special education teacher, what is being done, and maybe talking with the district representative and saying, well, it's complicated, especially like if you don't want to change schools, or even if you do want to change schools, to seeing if there are other places that can provide those services. I mean, you can always request, we're going to get to like, what if it's not working at the very end, and your conflict resolution options. But as an attorney, we love seeing things documented. So the more you can document your concerns and getting the school to confirm there's not a teacher, we don't have one, that is good evidence for you to then be able to go back to the school and negotiate for these compensatory services that Jackie's talking about.
Okay. I was going to move on, if that's okay. This fall, our school is going to be taking attendance. Can my child be marked absent?
Yes, there is a change to the attendance policy, or going back to an attendance policy where students will be marked absent if they aren't logging in. If your student has school refusal issues, then I think that's something that you should be communicating regularly with the school. Like, this is what I'm trying, like nothing is working. He or she is not participating, and we're working on it as best we can. But they can be marked absent. Students are going to be graded regularly this year. Oh, sorry, that's like another question. It's going to be a normal school day. So if there are multiple lessons they have to log into, then they're going to have to be marked absent or present for each of those.
I saw that high school is going to be marked, they're going to take attendance every period, whereas elementary school, they're going to take attendance one time a day, just so you know. And again, there are, I know that a lot of people are really freaking out over the length of the school day, and I'm freaking out too. You just should know that if your child has an IEP or a 504, that gives you extra tools to be able to like fight the appropriateness of that for your child. And if you do have a kid who like hates Google Hangout and is not going to check in that way, then you should be talking to the team about other ways that you can show that he's engaged in his learning. So maybe instead your child is having a phone call with somebody from the school instead of showing up on Google Hangout.
I have a question about accommodations relating to understanding instruction, material being read to him, assignment planner. Are these accommodations now off?
We're actually going to get to accommodations in like 2 questions. So I think we should just really, Melanie mentioned grading. I want to just talk about that like very quickly. That again, like your child's IEP or 504 gives you extra tools to get a tailored, individualized kind of grading system put in place. It can be a more informal thing where, you work out with a teacher like, okay, instead of, doing this many assignments, we're going to have your child do X, Y, or Z. Or it could be more formal where you actually are modifying the grading criteria in your child's IEP. So let me just show you really fast. If you're not sure where this is, I don't typically like modifying a kid's grades or how they're, the scale. I don't like it for kids with less severe disabilities, because I think if the IEP is doing what it's supposed to do, the kid should be getting okay grades. I think it can be appropriate with students with severe and profound disabilities, but in these crazy times, like it might be something to explore. That your kid is given a different scale, or they're just graded on different things than like the typical student.
Okay. I've got some questions that I think we're going to cover later on, but let's look at what about kids who usually have a paraprofessional? We asked CPS and they said they'll have a virtual one, but that won't help.
So yeah, the district is not, there are other districts that are having paraprofessionals meet with students outside. Unfortunately, CPS is not doing that. They're just having their paraprofessional, and this is something that the law allows, given the pandemic. So they're having paraprofessionals try to support students in other ways, using Google Chat to redirect the student, using breakout rooms to do like independent practice and supervise and reteach the child, trying to like facilitate interactions in small groups, on Google Hangouts. I had a paraprofessional, I had a student who had like extreme school refusal and wasn't showing up at all to Google Hangouts, and the para would just, text her every morning and get her jazzed up for the day. She really loved her para, and that was enough to get her kind of re-engaged back. So I think that, I've heard from a lot of teachers, they feel frustrated with the lack of communication about how paraprofessionals can be used. I have been seeing more guidance out of CPS trying to say, no, we can use them in creative ways. But yeah, we definitely have to get the word out that paras can be used, more. I think they were in limbo for sure.
Yeah, and I definitely would say, they're not going to be, in your home, saying, remember, do this, or we're on number 7, or, whatever that is. But I think, as Jackie's saying, like, really be communicating, over communicating with the case manager, with the teacher, with the paraprofessional, saying like, can we try this? Can we try this? Can we do a small group with the paraprofessional separately? Instead of, whatever is set up, is there, a way for us to break out into a separate conversation? Can the paraprofessional call me on the phone maybe and like walk through things? So I think if you can think of something, in this virtual environment that you think would be helpful that you can present to the school, I would present it, and then, see what the response is and see if you can, work together creatively with the school team.
So I have a mom here who said she contacted the school about the appropriateness for the remote learning expectations, and they turned that into a change in the LRE without supporting data. So she says, be careful that these requests can potentially have this happen to them. What should they do in that case?
I mean, you still have your procedural safeguards, and if they're going to change the student's placement because you're requesting more services, then I think you're going to need to utilize your procedural safeguards and file a complaint to invoke stay put. That's always there for you, so to stop any change in placement. I think it's definitely tricky to walk this line and walk this balance of like, I need more support, I need more services, and the school kind of responding, well, if we're going to do that, then you can't be in this class anymore. And I don't have a good answer. You know what I mean? I just feel like we need to be communicating with our concerns, and we need to be saying, well, we're not wanting to move to a more restrictive setting, we're wanting to utilize these supports in this way and see if we can come up with something else, and ask for flexibility. I mean, I think this is a time that schools should be interested in some sort of flexibility. And so I think that's something that you can present to them and respond and say, that's not what I want. I don't want a more restrictive placement, and see if you can work something out and continue to communicate.
Yeah, I've had some students like some parents want a therapeutic day school right now because some therapeutic day schools are in session and carrying on in person. Some are not. And I think there was like this huge fear on like the school side that they were going to be flooded with these requests for special schools because of that fact. I don't think that's really happening, because I also think parents understand that it would be really hard to I don't know. It's been all over the place. I've had other parents that like they wanted their child to move to a therapeutic day school, and then they ended up not going forward with it because if they have to be virtual, they'd rather have that their kid be virtual with their peers that they already know and their teachers that they already know. And so they've kind of just been working it out with the district. I really like Melanie said, if you go to a meeting and they change your child's placement in a way that you don't like, and I'm talking like a serious change in placement, or they take away a paraprofessional, anything like that, you can request mediation or file for due process. That's what gets you that stay put that Melanie just talked about. That's what freezes the IEP that you agreed with. So, I think CPS has been trying to get out the message of like, don't make these drastic changes right now. But if that is happening, just be aware you still have those protections.
Something that is a huge issue is that parents are working and they don't have time to sit with their children to access the curriculum, and they can't afford to pay for someone to do it also. So what do you recommend for those parents?
Yeah, I think sorry, Molly. I think at first,
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I think at first parents were saying like, I have this trouble, I'm having this issue with like the remote learning, and they were just so flooded by so many whatever parents that they like forgot, oh wait, some kids have a right to this individualized plan, and it was like a one size fits all approach, totally not appropriate. So people are saying like, I tried these methods of like asking for a remote learning plan. Like Melanie said, this is the wild, wild west. Like this remote learning plan concept is new. So I think some principals, teachers hear remote learning plan, they think, oh, everyone has that, and they kind of disregard maybe your special rights. So don't request a remote learning planning meeting. Request an IEP meeting. Those are what gives you your rights. Request it in writing. They have to respond to you within 10 days. If they say no to a meeting, they have to explain why in writing. Okay, so use the methods, the protections that you have to your advantage right now to remind the team, no, I have some special protections. Okay, and sorry, Melanie.
Yeah, I mean, with parents working all day, I guess I was just going to say there was a survey that CPS sent out. I don't know how it's being utilized, that if you need a place for your student to connect to remote learning, you could fill out the survey. And, I think they were going to try and utilize paraprofessionals in a way where they would be overseeing groups of students in schools, but they would have to wear masks all day while they were there, and, follow social distancing and all of those rules. To be able to have supervision and have someone working, in a way for them to be able to connect if their families weren't able to. I'm sure Mary could send out that link after as well. I don't know what the result of that has been. I just know they sent that out. I think it's a challenging time for everyone. And yeah, if you have families, you're working, you have multiple children, all of them need to connect, all of them need support. It's a very challenging time. So I would communicate that to the team and say, how can we, modify the schedule? How can we work in a way that, will actually make some progress instead of just be a disaster, right? So I don't have a good solution. Like we're all kind of sitting at home trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, and we don't have the resources to, pay for someone to come into our home and be our students' teacher. And so I think, trying to see what CPS is doing generally is maybe the first step, and then to going to your team and saying, okay, like I'm not going to be able to, monitor logging on every 30 minutes for 30 minutes and doing this work. So what can we do? What can we prioritize? And see what you can negotiate and what you can do. It's an unfair and very challenging time, and I don't have a better answer. I don't have a legal solution for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The CPS has a special education legal guidance, which I'm sure all of you have looked at, and some of it's like super outdated at this point, but there is some good language in there on pages 4, 5, and 9 about how students have a right to an individualized remote learning plan based on IEPs and appropriate accommodations, modifications that alleviate any unreasonable burden upon the parent. So quote, use their words against them and say like, you were aware of my kid's school refusal. It's talked about like crazy in his IEP. Like what this must be like. You had a whole team of educators that were trying to support him in this, and now you're expecting me to be the team. Like I can't do it. And just find who your ally is. This doesn't always have to be a formal IEP meeting. It's like finding that person on your kid's team that seems to get it and care, and make a plan with them. And if that doesn't work, then yes, step it up and go to those more formal methods.
So I'm kind of combining a few statements here that CPS is kind of forcing parents into due process, and it's connected to the earlier question about parents without the resources, have no way to access or participate in due process and win. So I know that's a frustration for a lot of parents who come up against this brick wall of CPS.
So you're saying CPS is declining to mediate? Is that what you're saying?
They're declining to mediate, just going straight to due process.
I mean, I think, if you file for due process, you still get to mediate, right? So that's your first, negotiation point with CPS anyway. So, I mean, it is a higher burden to draft a due process complaint than a mediation complaint. It does have to be much more detailed. We have templates. So if you want a template, I can send that to Mary and she can share it out with the material she shares after this.
Great.
But we have template due process requests that like list out the requirements. And within 30 days, you have to have a resolution session, which is often a mediation. So, I mean, you can then go to mediation anyway. And if you're not successful at mediation, you still have that protection of, stay put if there was a change in the student's IEP. And then if you're not successful at mediation, you can always withdraw your due process complaint as well. So I don't think you need to think of it as a scary thing. Like CPS doesn't want to go to due process either. Like they don't have the time or resources. So, if they're saying we're not going to mediate, well then file a due process complaint and force them to go to mediation. Like that's the first step of due process.
Yeah, and just so you know, ISB has issued guidance saying that should only be talking about compensatory education in terms of like when schools weren't making like a good faith effort. So use that language. Like the school didn't make a good faith effort. They only emailed me 2 times over 3 months. It's not, I don't think it's as hard to file due process as some parents think in their heads. And also there are 6 hearing officers. Due process hearings are being scheduled right now 6 months out. So you'll have time to learn if you have to. Like Melanie said, I do think it makes the cases kind of go up to the top and get attention faster.
Yeah, and the thing about the timeline, since it's like taking so long to actually have hearings, if you don't succeed at mediation, you can still negotiate after that point. I think a lot of families don't realize that. You can send a letter, we call them settlement offers. You send a letter to CPS and say, this is what I want to resolve this issue, and maybe it's the same thing you presented at mediation, and maybe because you're still moving forward, they'll, up whatever they offered or change whatever they offered at mediation. And maybe they'll have more time to get approval from their people. So I think, I don't think due process should be, it is a legal proceeding. It is complicated, but I think if they're not agreeing to mediate, and I think you can go to due process and get a mediation and get a good result.
Okay.
Mary, I can't hear you. Can other people hear Mary? Okay.
I think she froze. I think someone said they wanted to speak. I don't know. Do you want me to
Hey, Melanie,
Thank
this
you.
is Debbie Kohler. I just wanted to respond to what you said. This wasn't for me. These are for parents I know that are trying to go to all the lawyers and legal advocacy places, the universities, everything, and they're having horrible results. Nobody will take them on. And the problem is that, yes, CPS is putting out flat denials for mediation. It is really hard. I'm just on the sidelines reading some of the due process stuff that other people are going through and being a support. And I don't profess to knowing anything. It's just, I'm just hand-holding friends and other parents. But due process is ridiculous, especially if you know the people in CPS legal and you know how hard it is. I luckily had a lawyer help me, but there are parents out there who don't. And how do we get the powers that be to understand that your groups need financing? And I mean, there are parents literally pro se right now, just up against a team of people. And it's really hard. So to just say, oh, wait, you can learn in 6 months. Oh my gosh, that is not even fair. So I just,
Melanie didn't say that. Just so you know, I said that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that please, please don't misunderstand me.
Okay. I've got another.
Okay. I'll let it go.
Yeah.
I just think that there needs to be a solution, and I really think not having a way for parents to get free or low cost help is just going to grow CPS into a bigger monster than it already is.
Yeah, it's a huge issue where Mary's going to talk about at the end how we are getting together a bunch of attorneys to have like a legal clinic, to have short sessions with parents where they can advise them as to next steps and talk them through more of this. But like Melanie said, I think if a parent can write a complaint, and again, there are templates, and if a parent has any sort of expert support, if your child sees a therapist, if your child sees, I mean, it can even be a coach, an outside person to kind of say, yes, I've seen this kid lose skills, and I'm talking more than like the typical loss of skills that I've seen, across whatever. I think that you can I'm just saying, I'm not suggesting you actually go all the way to hearing. I hope you don't have to. That is very hard. But I'm hoping that, like Melanie said, through mediation, you can like get a foot in the door to get something going.
Okay, just so you know, I got kicked off, and so I don't have the previous chat questions to look at. So I'm gonna move on to, can changes be made to a child's IEP and thus remote learning plan to help remote go better?
Yeah.
What changes,
Go ahead.
sorry, what changes to the IEP could be helpful?
Yeah, so I think when we're looking at requesting an IEP meeting to the school district to say, you know, this isn't working, what can we do to change? We can go through, I think Jackie's gonna pull up all the different sections of the IEP, but we can go through and say, okay, well, we're having, you know, a difficulty with, you know, all of these different areas. You know, we have first the areas of need and the accommodations and modifications in the special factors. So if there are behaviors that are happening, we can, you know, create a behavior plan for remote learning. And I think you're gonna have to be creative with the school. I've heard of some schools who have like items that students were working for at school to send those to the home and say, okay, like the parent now has control over giving these desired items to the student when they are logging in. You know, we wanna get those, you know, positive interventions. Those are things that we can, you know, provide. If there are additional things for technology that are needed because, you know, the screen isn't working or we need something else to help engage the student. I think we have a lot of technology now. We can try and troubleshoot and try and, you know, think through some other pieces. You know, if they need to listen to instructions again, you know, maybe they could have, you know, work out a way to record the instructions and be able to play them back, or be given, you know, different copies of the presentation. If there's a presentation or copies of the materials, they could have things be sent home to them. So like if you're working out of a textbook, have a copy, you know, at home, or if you need paper packets instead of the Google Classroom sheets, like request that the school district provide those things to you. So here, you know, Jackie's showing the accommodations and modifications general. So if they have, you know, verbal directions in clearly stated steps, ask, sorry, I can't read it. It's a little blurry for me. Ask student yes, no questions. So, you know, we have these accommodations. How can we incorporate these into a remote learning session? How can we utilize the paraprofessional aid? How can we utilize Google Classroom and materials to help, you know, facilitate these accommodations? And I think that's something that you're going to want to explore, like really get to know what's in your student's IEP and, you know, talk with the teacher and say, this isn't working. What do you think we can do to adjust these things?
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
One thing I just wanted to draw attention to, like I hear this from teams all the time. You know, I'd be saying like, okay, well this student who's a ninth grader reads at a third grade level. Like obviously he needs assistive technology, right? Like he needs text to speech and speech to text and whatever. And they would say like, oh, well, that's already available in our program, so we're not going to put it in. Well, like that's when this is now an issue. Like the parent doesn't have as strong of a foot to say like, hey, I not only do I need like a Chromebook, but I need it with some special technology. So, you know, you can request an IEP meeting to fix whatever like underlying issues there is with the IEP. Maybe your child like is having a really hard time in electives that are happening remotely because it's really common for accommodations and modifications to be left out of those. So it could be an issue that like, you know, was always kind of the case. Like maybe, you know, maybe the IEP should have been fixed a bit ago, but now it's like really standing out because you just don't have the supports of like the program that are built in.
All right, I'm going to go back to the chat. We have someone whose child had some regression before COVID and remote learning was not successful, even though the parent or the teacher tried to engage every day. the child just could not do it. The parent asked for possible reimbursement for a tutor to come into the home, and the district rep said no. Do you have any other ideas on how to address this issue for a child who cannot engage remotely and is showing regression?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are really tough cases when a student's not able to engage remotely, whether it's they don't have the attention span, they have, additional disabilities that make, viewing the screen difficult, or, whatever, things that are impacting your student. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it sounds like you've asked for a lot of different things. I don't know if there are other programs that you could connect them with that would be helpful, or trying to come up with, is there some sort of online program that they could get connected to that was different supports. I mean, I think if you really want a tutor to come to the home, I think you're going to have to go through mediation or due process to get something like that. I don't think, a district rep doesn't have the authority to provide that.
This was my question. And so it was like a combination of two things. That my daughter's an eye gaze user. Her brain is unaffected, but she doesn't move. And she's nonverbal. So someone has to be with her every single minute. We tried, we were on almost every single Zoom last time, but the regression started even before COVID started because of the teacher didn't match her learning style. Now so I let them know that most likely I would be offered a position, and I was last night, for CPS as a special ed teacher. So she will be with a nurse, it is absolutely not their responsibility to do online learning. And so I asked in preparation that I'd be on possibly the first week, and this is before I got the position last night. And would they consider a tutor? She went to the district and they said, no, they can't do that, but do I have any other type of request? Because no other program is going to work. I can't afford a tutor myself. That's why I'm working. So they said, if they say no, what would I do? And I said, she will be probably offline the entire time. And she doesn't, packets do nothing for her.
Right, no, I understand that.
So I don't know where to go, or do I start some type of due process? Do I not sign her on for several weeks and see what they do? I don't even understand where to go.
Ooh.
And I think there's several other of us, even not, that just have a one-on-one that have to work, and there's no way that we can do. I'm sure I'm not the only one on here.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good solution for you. I mean, I think if you can identify someone to be the tutor, like, I don't know if you've contacted, some sort of organization that provides tutoring services, and then bring that to them. And I think you would want to bring that to them in a mediation request or a due process request. I mean, you can call our helpline and you can talk with an attorney more specifically. I mean, I think this situation is just really difficult. I'm working with a client right now with a visual impairment that doesn't use an eye gaze device, and we're facing similar barriers. So I don't know if maybe you would want to explore, requesting a change in placement to a more restrictive setting, maybe a place that would have experience with that type of communication or eye gaze device. And we can, if you want to call Equip for Equality, we can send you a list of schools or the ISB database where you can search schools. I'm thinking of probably, I don't know where you live, but 4 schools are probably all the schools.
Yeah, we did do process in kindergarten, and she's going into her freshman year. Therapeutic Day is absolutely not appropriate for her because of her cognitive ability. So if we were in real school, or if we had a person just next to her, that's what we need. But another placement won't meet her academic needs that I know of.
Yeah.
I would just say, I don't think it's the right way to go is to not contact them for 3 weeks, or to see, you know, if they know, like, I think over contact them, email them every day. This is a reminder that I'm a working parent and I'm not able to like sit next to my child, and therefore my child is not learning. You know, every single day, because if whatever ends up happening, you don't want to look uncooperative. And you know what I mean? Like, and so don't give them any low hanging fruit. Like, be like, how could they couldn't possibly argue that they weren't aware. I emailed them every single day and they didn't offer solutions, you know, and that's a really shitty answer, and I'm sorry.
No, that helps. And I didn't mean like not to contact them, but I like the idea of contact. I meant not logging her on, because if I tried to log her on with a nurse who is pulled from her medical job of taking care of my daughter, then they think that it's kind of handled. So I almost think it's better her not to log on, but me to contact and say, Allie's not on today. There's no one to work with her. Allie's not on today. What can you do? Thank you. That alone helps some.
And then the only other thing I'll add is, like, Melanie and I we're gonna talk about this, that the IDA does give this possible like path to parent training. And so, you know, in this example, it could be more like babysitter training, or, you know what I mean? Like, but helping a caretaker kind of, the idea is like teaching parents to be able to implement the IEP. Other school districts in Illinois have a space that say like, you know, does the parent need any parent training? 'Cause it's a related service that's recognized under the IDA. CPS, usually the way that they train parents is through like the parent universities and things like that. But this is one thing that we could all do. We could all push CPS to start like providing better training to parents with students with disabilities. And here, I'm just gonna put up on the screen kind of the site, so that you can cite the law when you request this. I am not like making any big promises that they're going to recognize this, but it is like one thing you can kind of throw in. So we were thinking like, you know, maybe what they do is they put in consult under that LRE grid. You know, sometimes it's like the nurse to the general education teacher. Maybe it's the special education teacher to the parent. Maybe that's one way to push. You know, just another tool. I don't have high hopes for it, but there's something in the law that you can kind of try to use.
Yeah, I definitely think we should be pushing harder for that, and especially if your student uses some sort of technology to communicate as well, to train parents on how to use that regularly, more than their one-day training, like a regular, consistent training to parents.
Can you talk briefly about evaluations? Because I know there are some parents who are in evaluation limbo right now.
Yeah, so evaluations, so the Department of Education didn't make any waivers to the timelines. So now CPS is way behind because they didn't complete any of the evaluations in the spring. They didn't do very many evaluations for existing evaluations over the summer. And now triennial reevaluations are coming due for more students now as we are entering the new school year. And so the school district has 60 school days to complete an evaluation. So once you have a domain meeting, a meeting to go over which evaluations they're going to complete, or once you sign that consent form that lists them, if you don't have a meeting, that like has a grid and it'll say cognitive, academic, social, emotional, motor skills, health, all of those areas. Once you sign that form, then the school district has 60 school days, and you know, September 8th is a school day. Like, you know, we're going into full school days now. And so some evaluations are not allowed to be done remotely. For example, the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, the creators of that test have said this is not a test that you can do virtually. But if you are able to you're able to do many parts of evaluation. A lot of it is a records review. A lot of it is questionnaires for the parent. interviews with the parent, interviews with the student, interviews with the teacher. All of those things can be done virtually. There are elements that should be done in person for certain students, but I think if you think that your student can participate virtually, I know some like private psychologists have been doing academic testing virtually. And it should be noted that this is not a standardized measure, and I think they're coming out with more guidance on how to, the test makers are coming out with more guidance on how to address these things in a virtual setting. And I'm assuming now they're doing trials of these tests with students in a virtual setting to kind of get some standardized measures, but I mean, that will take time. But I think that's something that you can talk about, like my student can participate virtually, and so we want to move forward with this evaluation. If you don't think that's a good idea, then maybe you don't want to push for that, and maybe you want to talk about what you can do virtually. I think I would definitely be pushing the school district to complete as much as they can, and I think this is complicated because the academic testing is a very crucial part. Maybe looking at previous standardized tests. I don't know what they're going to be doing for the NWA yet. Is that guidance? I can't remember now. I have to look at the guidance again if that is happening or not. Those tests.
They're giving it to the 8th graders who haven't taken it in October for purposes of the high school application process.
Yeah, so I think, kind of looking at those scores, we have the winter scores is like the most recent ones we have on those, and maybe looking at those trends, and then, if your evaluation's coming up and you're going to be able to get the new ones, even though it's virtual, I think there'll probably be some decline from that. You can use those as some academic kind of anchor points, but I think we should be moving forward with doing evaluations. If you have private insurance, I would be contacting your insurance provider to see if you can get a private evaluation at this time, because private providers are doing in-person evaluations. I mean, they'll be
okay. We have someone who has an independent evaluation with an autism diagnosis, and she wants to know if the school shouldn't just accept that instead of delaying because they won't do the evaluations remotely.
I mean, they might give you like a GARS just to confirm it. I don't know. Most of the time when I have an outside autism evaluation in ADOS, CPS doesn't do another ADOS. Like that would not be a typical procedure. So they would maybe accept the ADOS portion of that assessment, but then maybe do their own testing in other areas or do their own interviews. So, I mean, I think it's good that you have that evaluation, and then you can accept CPS. I would assume they would accept it. I guess, that's maybe a big assumption for CPS. If it's highly contested that he has autism or she has autism, then maybe that's a different question. But
so I think there's a question about private evaluations that, just for clarification, CPS does not have to accept them. They can say, no, we want to do our own. Correct?
Yeah, that is correct. If they have an outside ADOS that says autism, I don't think that they would do their own ADOS because they're not doing in-person evaluations, and that has to be done in person. So I don't see why CPS wouldn't accept that, but they could say we're not going to accept it, right? They have to consider it, but they don't have to accept it.
Right. I think
they're supposed to explain why it is they're not accepting it. And a lot of times they forget to do that. If this is an initial evaluation, like they still have a child find requirement. And so like, if, they eventually yes, they could find your child eligible outside, like using that outside evaluation, or they could supplement it with a records review, or supplement it with an interview of your child's old teachers. They don't have to like do the whole shit like Melanie is like Melanie's saying.
Yeah. So, but what I was saying before is if you have a triennial reevaluation that is past due or coming up and you're concerned, If you have private insurance, I would contact your insurance provider and see if you could get a private evaluation. And if you don't have private insurance, there are different places where you can get an evaluation using Medicaid, but there are generally wait lists. So if that's something that you're interested in, like I would be doing that right away because that does take time. And then you present that evaluation to the school district. And you can have more, communication with those evaluators and say, this is what I'm looking for. Like I would talk to them and say, can you give me any recommendations on X, Y, and Z? Like I'm looking for a paraprofessional aid. I'm looking for a therapeutic day school placement, or I'm looking for any of that.
So
GARD is the Gilliam Autism Rating Scale. Sorry if I am using acronyms.
we
It's
have a question. Go ahead. We have a question about timelines. If someone asks for an IEP meeting on the 19th and the clock doesn't start till September 8th, correct? And if yes, they're supposed to let you know whether they're going to go ahead with an IEP meeting, or they're supposed to tell you why they're not. Isn't that the case within 10 days?
Yeah.
So-
So if they say no to your IEP meeting request, they are supposed to explain why in writing it is not necessary for your child to receive their appropriate education. If they say yes, like then they can verbally say, okay, yeah, like we agree to a meeting. How's this date? And then they should send you a notification of conference. I feel like maybe the law is in support of this idea that like it is just 10 calendar days that you're supposed to get a response, but in practicality, like I feel like clock does start ticking on September 8th. Melanie, I don't know if you feel differently on that.
I mean, it's 10 calendar days to respond saying, yes, we're going to have an IEP meeting, or no, we're not going to have an IEP meeting. Often before this past Monday when teachers were back working, we'll contact the team on August 31st, like when school resumes, to schedule a date, right? So they just have to say yes or no within 10 calendar days. They don't have to schedule it within 10 calendar days, which is, a problem.
Yeah. I feel like Mary, a theme keeps being like, how do we hold a team accountable? And so I just want to flip to that slide really fast. And
Sure.
Again, like you all are, we see like how everyone has a lot of questions, and we know it's a really confusing time. So we're thinking that we're going to have this clinic that I mentioned on September 26th. So hold the date. These are all great questions, and I'm sorry that we're not able to get to everything. But let me just pull up this issue of like, how do you hold the team accountable? Okay, so you all know that like a lot of your case of like your child regressing is showing whether or not they're making progress. And IEP progress reports can be really important for that. So I know that you all are used to getting those quarterly reports and it says like making expected progress, right? But really like what you should do is you should ask for whatever the method of measurement is that they're using to cite that progress, okay? So if your child's goal is student will be reading like 8 out of 10 words, like say, I want the word list that you guys, administered to my child supposedly remotely to figure out that he was meeting that goal. Okay, so you can ask for more than just like those not very helpful IEP progress reports. You can ask for the method of measurement. Like, if it's child will write a paragraph, ask for a copy of the paragraph that they're using to claim that he or she is making progress. Okay. Related service logs, you have a right to those, and they can have a lot of really, really good information. So if you're thinking like, yeah, so, and a lot of times, like, I feel like maybe people forget that parents have a right to see those, and providers might be a little more candid than they would be during a meeting. So check those out, and maybe you can use some of that information. Like, hey, the social worker also saw that my kid was having a really hard time paying attention. I'm telling you that he is. can you help me? Can you teach me some strategies to help with my kid's attention? Okay. You should be keeping track of how often your child is seeing the related service provider, how long, and in what setting. Is that person coming into the whole class? Is seeing your child in a group, etc. Okay, communication log. I know you all have heard about this a lot, but we also want you to start recording observations of your kid. If you notice that like your child, you know, in April was able to say the TH sound and now he's not, like, you know, write that down. All of those things can kind of help build your case to whatever it ends up being. I know that a lot of you will text parents, will text teachers, and I get it, like it helps them respond faster, but just try to take a screenshot or like write down an important text so that you don't have to go like digging through all the way. That can be hard if you are filing a state complaint about like, hey, the teacher texted me saying there is no para. You know, you'll have to like go all the way through all of your texts to find that again. That can be really annoying. You have limited time, so you might want to do that. And I think we already mentioned this, but like using your experts. I haven't, I've heard of one case where we have had an expert like observe the student during their remote learning session. Maybe they're going to push back on this idea, but I would say that you have a right to have your experts observe your child in the school placement. And right now our school placement is remote learning. So you can have them, I'm sure you'll have to fill out an observation form like you would in the past, but you could have that expert sit in and then they could kind of write down the things that they saw that were concerning to them or recommendations that they have for the team. You can use that letter to request an IEP meeting and attach that letter to your request. And I think that that gives you even more credibility.
Yeah, and just going back to the IEP progress reports, I would definitely look at those because a lot of times they'll say making expected progress, but even then, you know, the goal will be 70% and it'll say 60% making expected progress. Well, that's not making expected progress. So, I mean, I think, you know, just even like reading it a little bit more carefully, or if the goal said like with 2 prompts and then like the narrative says, you know, with maximum assistance or like, you know, more than 2
Good
prompts.
evening. How are you doing today?
1 second. Right.
Should we try to attack some of these questions in the chat?
Yes, let's do that. So this is kind of related to the question of getting what kind of materials, what can the school do in terms of getting materials to your child? And also, there's someone who has a lot of accommodations, and hold on 1 second. And she is like she's supposed to be read to, have an assignment planner. Are these accommodations off the table now with remote learning? So it's kind of connected to, like, if you have manipulatives, you're supposed to have that kind of thing. Isn't the school supposed to deliver them to you?
Yeah, there are going to be some accommodations that aren't able to like be carried out right now, like preferential seating. It doesn't seem so relevant, right? So it's not like you know, but there are lots of accommodations. You know, like we have a lot of students who shut down if they have like a lot of work. If there might be overwhelmed. So maybe everyone in the class is getting 5 questions and that student is only having to answer 1 question. So that's still an accommodation that can absolutely be implemented at this time. But in terms of like materials, you know, that assistive technology section that we were looking at before, that covers low tech materials too. So maybe your child needs like noise canceling headphones, and that's like in his assistive technology section. You then have a right to those. And you can, you know, you can pick them up from the school. You know, a lot of people will have like OT accommodations where it says, sensory toys, you can then ask to get those picked up. And even if like those aren't in the IEP, you can still make a case, my kid needs this to learn, and they should coordinate you picking those up. Assignment notebooks, absolutely,
Yeah, and I think, if they need, the math manipulatives, or they need, materials that maybe they would have in a classroom setting, like ask for a set of those to be sent home for that, if that's the unit you're working on.
Say that again?
We're going to get a link though,
I'll
right?
send, I'll,
Presentation, is that correct?
yeah, yes,
That's awesome. Because I
that's
definitely,
correct.
I
Yeah.
definitely got here late. I got to hear a little bit of great stuff, so I can't imagine what great stuff I missed. So
Yeah, there was a lot of great stuff. So let's see. I know we didn't get to a lot of questions about what is going on at your school, Kat or Kate. I know there's a lot there. I'm hoping that when we have the advocacy or the special ed clinic on the 26th, they'll be able to help with more individual stuff, or maybe you guys can sign on together, people from your school.
It's quite scary because it's all sort of not working on the best case scenario, but
right.
If you really aren't there and you didn't have those services before, and I'm one of those people who's my son is supposed to be finishing off a summer assessment, which is supposed to be finished before the first day that school starts. And no one can give me a clear answer why they can't finish the assessment other than it has to be face-to-face. And I paid for a private assessment, and they can't even clarify what it is, the exact thing they need to be face-to-face. But
So I would ask you, I would suggest that you ask them to put in writing why your assessment is not acceptable to continue with the process.
Yes, that's what from this situation, what I realized is I needed to clarify what specifically it was that they needed to finalize, and to explain why they couldn't do it remotely or face to face.
were you using the summer assessment team?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Did you contact George Coleman from that team?
Whom, sorry?
George Coleman is the manager of that team.
Okay.
She's if you I'll put her email in the chat. Let me get it real quick and I'll put it.
Thank you. I asked for the OJLSS officer of my district was supposed to be helping, and he basically said that there's not clarity on when face-to-face can happen again, and he's talking to, other psychologists, and I thought the point of doing the summer assessment is that it had to be finalized before the first day of school.
Yep, you are correct. Yep.
So if they're not doing it, then they must be out of compliance.
Yeah,
they are. And
so George, she's the manager of summer of the assessment team. So I just sent the email.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I guess the thing is that also, what the whole system doesn't really, do is if you are working, how the heck are you going to do all of this? I mean, the recommendations are so lovely. You have to be physically present 24/7 to document, to have all these things to hand. And so it makes it very challenging if you don't have that capacity. And unfortunately, our children are being graded, but really it feels that it's the parents' responsibility for the success of the child and not the school, which doesn't really make sense.
Okay, so Melanie, you were able to get back on, but can you send your link to Jackie? Because she can't get back on.
Yeah, I think Alex just is sending it to her.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. The parent has to be there to document everything. You're right. Like, it's impossible. It's an impossible task. So, whether it's sending an email saying, look, like, I can't be my kid's teacher. It's supposed to be a free, appropriate public education. And just, say, this isn't free to me. Like, I have to work. I don't have the time to do this. So you need to be able to, provide me someone who can do this. And they're going to say no, but I think you need to be sending that email and pushing them to do something. And I don't know what the answer is. I honestly, you know, if it's getting them to pay for someone to come to your house, having your student go to a school site where they can be supervised, like, you know, maybe those are the options that you want to push them to consider and say, like, these are the options that would work for me. Like,
I think that, I mean, so I guess what my concern is, so I started a new job, but I'm literally taking into account paying a full-time salary for someone to just to sit with my child, so that they can supervise that my child will stay on task. He has ADHD and he has multiple learning deficiencies, and so I'm having to pay thousands of dollars. Now, the summer survey came out, and that was for, you know, for people who literally have to go and leave their children alone to go to work. So it's about safety, but it doesn't suggest that there's any sort of supervision of their actual academic capacity in the CPS offering. So what that still speaks to is diverse learners who do not have the privilege that I do of being able to afford another person are completely slipping through the cracks. And if there is a focus for Equip for Equality, especially given this time and, you know, all the stuff that's going on right now and how many other people's lives matter, I think that you know, if you cannot afford the luxury of this, then you're basically without FAPE. It's an impossibility. And there has to be some solution if that's the case.
Yeah, it's a really difficult place to be, especially for people who don't have the resources.
And with no clear end in sight, we need to be really proactive about what our approach is going to be before we lose a generation of children in this.
So I'm going to get back on track where we were. We were talking about materials and accommodations. I don't know if the person who asked the question is on here, but I'm going to be extra careful about this chat list or this participants list. So if I'm distracted, that's why. Do you want to talk about that? Oh, Jack, I can't hear you. Hold on.
I was very impressed. You were really on that.
Thank you.
I feel like we answered the accommodation question, or like the materials question. Like, yes, in the spring there was, I had one student whose goal was that he would write in his planner, and the school's response was like, oh, his planner is stuck at school, like, guess we can't work on this goal. Like, there shouldn't be any more of that. You know, the school should be working with the parent, making these materials available, and again, like low tech too, highlighters, whatever. That assistive technology section can be really helpful to get those materials. And also, like, if your child has OT or things like that, look at those accommodations and cite those, or request an IEP meeting to get more things added so that you can get more materials.
Okay. So let's see. What to do when all of this hasn't worked? We started talking briefly about the procedural safeguards.
yeah,
But, I was actually very encouraged, Melanie, when you said you've got templates for due process stuff, because I think a lot of parents just get so stopped because they have nowhere to start.
Yeah, I mean, we have a template for due process. We have a template for mediation. I think, you know, the people, the person who was saying earlier, you know, CPS is declining to mediate, so it's forcing parents to go to due process, which they can't navigate. You know, it's a really complicated process. It is not parent friendly. I 100% agree, but I think if they're forcing you into it, I think you have to try and use it in a way that can be accessible to you, and that is the resolution period, right? They're required to participate in a resolution period. And so you can still get mediation even if you've requested due process, as I mentioned earlier. And you know, if you are unable to be successful at mediation, you can still try and negotiate. I think it'll be definitely harder if you're not an attorney to be able to negotiate with CPS, but you can, I've recommended this to parents who we've declined to represent or we weren't able to represent due to resources, saying, draft a letter of what you want and send it to them and say, you know, put the disclaimer for settlement purposes only on that and send it to them and try and get something. But again, if they're changing your placement because you're asking for more services, you can request mediation. If they decline to participate in mediation, then you still have 10 school days after they've declined mediation to request due process to still maintain that right of stay put. So you can still maintain that previous placement that you had agreed upon in your previous IEP, even if they decline mediation and you request due process. So sometimes it is just to use your procedural safeguards to be able to buy more time or to come up with some sort of agreement with the district. And then there's other options, as Jackie mentioned.
Okay. So
I think you're a little bit frozen, Mary, so I'm not quite sure when you're talking. Okay,
go ahead.
so there's also state complaint. So if you have examples of not getting minutes, not getting related service providers, if you look at those logs, you can go to ISB and say, here's the log, they're not getting the minutes, their IEP says this many minutes, and you can submit that to ISB and they just kind of review records. They might interview you, they might interview the school staff and do an investigation, and then they'll issue a finding or not. That's another option. We have resources on all of these methods of conflict resolution. There are certain timelines that you have to meet to file for different types of complaints. So those are things you need to be aware of as well.
I'm just gonna respond quickly to some of the chat questions, Mary. Mo, I would just say if CPS has gone to 3 mediations with you, you must have a good case, and that's encouraging that they've done it 3 times. So I know that must be really annoying and awful to have 3 different mediations, but I think that's a little bit encouraging if we heard that they're just saying no to a lot of people. Katrine, oh, okay. Do you know of an example where a parent has sued or gone so a due process case? I think it's very unlikely that it would have gone to hearing by this time, since all of this started happening in March. I know of parents who have settled a case that is where remote learning was somewhat involved. It wasn't like the whole issue, but no, I don't know where it was like just about remote learning.
I believe in Minnesota there was a class action that a group of parents went against the school system, suggesting that it didn't work, and it wasn't successful at all. And I guess what I'm asking is, you know, when CPS is such a beast right now, how much success can there be?
Yeah, I think I'm not familiar with the Minnesota case, but the Hawaii and Pennsylvania cases, the complicating thing about the IDEA is that it's individualized, and so having a class action is it's a high burden to meet, because one of the points of having a class action is you need to have commonality, and with everyone's IEPs being different, they don't meet the commonality aspect of it. This is like legal jargon, so if you don't understand what I'm saying, that's okay.
Makes sense, I understand.
But it's really challenging. So the Pennsylvania one was like more specific to students with more significant disabilities. The Hawaii one was all students with disabilities, and they're you know still sitting on motions to dismiss from those. So
I guess in the case of, rather than having specific disabilities, I guess my question is, what if there's consistent mismanagement and misservice, i.e. not being in compliance for meetings, not being in compliance for record requests? not having teachers service students or provide their minutes accurately. What if, say, over a period of time, a group of 5 parents can come up with exactly the same issues with exactly the same school? Would that be, would it all have to be specific to the child's IEP, or could it just be that the school is completely mismanaging and not performing their duty sufficiently? Is that a big enough reason to be able to have a class action?
So the IDA requires exhaustion. So really, like, one of those parents would have to file a due process case, and then like after that, then like you can file a class action. I think an easier option for like parents could be like a class state complaint. And the reason that those are good is like you can kind of have ISB do the work. And they be the ones to investigate whether or not there was a systemic kind of violation. So what you would do, typically state complaints are written for one individual, but we have written like ones on behalf of multiple students to show that it is like a school-wide issue. And we have had like, they can order compensatory education, and do trainings at school, put more pressure on the school to hire whatever staff is missing. Alma, I wanted to respond to your question about your son with dyslexia. During remote learning, you can request an evaluation. You can request like a multi-sensory evaluation, or you could pay, if you pay $100, I think the consult is to Redwood Literacy. If you Google Redwood Literacy, they do some testing around dyslexia. You could bring then that testing to the school. I'm not sure if your child already has an IEP, but you could either bring that to the school to get a first IEP, or to say like, hey, this IEP isn't working. My son needs the Wilson program. CPS does have the Wilson reading program available within some schools, and it is possible to get your son kind of get going in that multisensory program even during remote learning.
Yeah, and just continuing back
All
to your
right.
question, if you want,
Go ahead.
if you have like something that you would want to bring as a class action, you can contact Equip for Equality, and we could determine if it would be something we would investigate. But class actions in this context are difficult, and we've done state complaints. I mean, part of how the whole ISB corrective action has gone through, like ISB's, like this public inquiry thing, was because several advocates brought up some systemic issues that were affecting all students. So, how successful that has been 2 years later is still questionable, since none of the compensatory services have been enacted, but there are avenues that we're trying. It is a broken system, and we're really trying to make headway for families. We really are.
I appreciate that, and there are at least 3 other people from the same school that have been on this call, and every single one. So we're trying our best together. Thank you very much.
Good luck. Give them hell.
It's good, Kate. Okay, so we're reaching at the end of our time. I was thinking, Jackie, do we want to do the poll for who's here? It's only 13 people. Okay,
Up to
so
you.
I am going, yeah, let's do it. So we have a poll, you guys, just a couple of questions, if you could quickly respond. Oh, this happened last time. All right, it's not gonna work. So let's see, John Ann, are you on here? Who else is on here? Another raise your hand person is on here.
Hey, this is Natasha.
Oh, hi, Natasha. How are you? If I make you the host, can you launch the poll?
Oh, yes, I see the poll. The first question, I can go ahead and do that now.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Can anyone see it? Oh, you can. I can't.
You said you can't see it, Mary?
Yes.
I wonder. I see 3 of 11 have voted. 4 of 11 have voted.
You know, yeah, I'm thinking they're.
I'm wondering if it's in a different window.
I think a lot of people on the call are probably not parents at this point that logged back.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna overlook that, or move on from here and say that the poll is a wash at this point. Basically, we were just asking, and I can put that out on the special ed raise your hand Facebook page to see what people are interested in as far as training, parent training is concerned going forward. Melanie and Jackie. So, and I can also put out information about the legal clinic on the 26th, and we can get that all out there. It is 7, y'all. I think we should probably wrap it up at this point.